This is Kentucky Afield Radio. This is Ron Rohde, Kentucky Afield's first host back in 1953. Now, I'm proud to present Charlie Baglan.
Stumble out of bed, you take a risk. Bathtub, risk. Get in the car. Any road you pick follows a route called risk. And recreation, the thrill-seeking side of our life at any age, can also be a gamble. We go inside outdoors with those in the know about danger, where it lurks in our outdoor life, how to minimize it, and maximize the fun. Careful, don't touch that dial. It's all next on Kentucky Afield Radio. Helicopter rescue swimmer Mike Bayersky, United States Coast Guard.
Chances are the Coast Guard wasn't there when you went overboard. But when you wear a Coast Guard-approved life jacket, we're closer than you think. Closer when you jet ski, fish, tube, canoe, kayak. There for close calls, when help isn't close at all.
Kentucky conservation officers remind you your life jacket's got your back. And the backing of the best swimmers everywhere.
Before E.
What you writing?
Working on a list about my neighbor.
Oh, you mean like kind, considerate?
Oh, no, more like deceitful.
He's a good guy.
Good till he goes fishing. Then he's a despicable two-faced cheat. Says that bass was 12 pounds. It's 10 pounds at best.
Remember what Fish and Wildlife says. Fishing isn't about math, it's about fun. And say it with me. And fudging a little if you need to.
Kentucky fishing.
Let it make a liar out of you.
Welcome to Kentucky Afield Radio. My name is Charlie Baglan. It is a rambunctious world we live in. There's risk at every turn. Basketball, watch out for elbows. Fishing, watch out for that hook. We can't avoid risk, and maybe that's what makes recreation thrilling. It's one thing to follow instructions and play by the rules, but it's next to impossible to put a knee pad on fate. Today, we're featuring a special show, something we call Reducing the Risk. We will look at safety in the many ways we recreate. And if you like regular sports or you're really into the outdoors, there's a bunch of them. I'll never forget my friend Jeff in the 7th grade. Tough guy, thick wavy hair, dimples, sort of our own Arthur Fonzarelli of middle school, the Fonz. And every school has one of these guys. He'd walk into a room, and the girls would just melt. In PE class, if you were choosing sides for dodgeball, Jeff was the guy you would want on your side. He was the man. In athletics, he had that innate ability to shine. Then, one day, Jeff comes hobbling into class on crutches. Oh no, the mighty had fallen. But did that change the way we saw Jeff? Well, as a matter of fact, it did. It made him even more heroic. He'll be back, better than ever. You just wait. Sports does that to us. They pump us up, and they can bring us down. None among us is immune from injury. And the more active you are, the more prone you are. The National Safe Kids campaign and the American Academy of Pediatrics both published some statistics that nationally said about 30 million kids and teens are active in sports, and injuries resulting in lost time occurred to about 3.5 million. So that's better than 10%. The most common injury? Ankle sprain. This is Kentucky Afield Radio, and typically we don't talk about football or soccer, but if that's what kids do, that's what they do, along with hiking and camping and fishing and archery and some of the other more nature-related sports. So we'll talk about them all here a little bit, and the thread that weaves them all together is the risk of injury. That's why as instructors or as coaches or as parents, we strive to give our kids proper guidelines, proper oversight, the best safety equipment, etc., etc., etc. We want to reduce the risk of being hurt. Sports exist for us all to enjoy, boy, girl, regardless of size, regardless of shape or our physical challenges. So what's safe? What's not? Some sports may surprise you. And in this hour, we'll give you some good information to chew on as your son or daughter comes home saying they want to try something new. Safety is a common topic on this show. I have a soft spot for it. I get frustrated when kids or adults or anybody just simply disregards the rules, or if someone says a tough sport is actually very easy. But one day a safety brochure arrived in the mail. It was from the Archery Trade Association. It was comparing injury rates that occur in archery to other mainstream sports. They say that basketball is the most injury-likely sport, with about 23 people out of every 1,000 playing getting hurt. 23 in 1,000. Follow that with football, soccer, cheerleading. Fishing makes that list. It's down there at number 12. Going down a little farther, we find archery, 4th from the bottom. So archery is the 4th safest sport, followed by bowling, badminton, and ping pong. So all this made me curious. How safe are many of the things that we discuss on this show? As a parent, you surely have concerns about what's safe and what isn't. So in this show, we're going to look at a lot of these things. Roy Grimes, who is the president and the man who actually began NASP, the archery program, will join us. We'll also talk hunter safety and water safety, mistakes commonly made there. Also coming up, I have 2 specialists in the field of recreational injury from Johns Hopkins University. First up, let's start with an overview of the list of sports that kids often learn when they go to summer camp. Gary Rogers is the assistant director of Camp Earl Wallace, a conservation camp operated by the Department of Fish and Wildlife on Lake Cumberland. Activity in the wild outdoors, that's an accident just waiting to happen. How many kids do you have every year at camp?
Normally you'll have 208 is your maximum per week.
What activities are taught at camp?
We have nature and outdoor survival. We have gun safety, archery, boating, swimming, and fishing and casting. So they go to 7 different things sometime during the week. Every kid does every activity at some point during their week at camp.
Gary, when I was a kid, and I assume this hasn't changed, I was rambunctious. I was always falling down. I was getting hurt. Are kids still that way today, and what do you do to try to correct that in all the things that you teach them?
I believe you can get a kid could hurt himself in a room full of marshmallows if you give him enough time. But if you do the right thing around kids and give them the right rules when they get to camp, there's not really very many accidents at camp. The biggest accidents used to be like running down the hill, going to an activity, want to be the first one in an activity, or go in the cabin with nobody in there changing clothes and they're bunk diving at each other and playing like they're wrestling or whatever kids do. And we kind of modified how we run camp to avoid that, where the counselors walk to the activities with the kids so they have an adult around them going back and forth, and they're really not allowed in their cabins all day anymore. You go in there if you have to change in or out of your swimming suit, and basically you're in there otherwise just to sleep. So anytime a kid can be someplace where they're unobserved, that's the kind of thing you have to cut out, because they will take every opportunity to get hurt. If you give them enough rope, they'll hang themselves with it, I guess.
Kids are there to learn these specific activities, and you want them to learn it in a safe manner.
Exactly.
What kind of protocols are in place across all 3 Kentucky conservation camps to see that this happens?
Well, first of all, if you're going to an activity, say it's archery or gun safety, before they're ever even allowed to touch a gun or a bow, they have to sit through the instruction. There's a lecture at all the activities, a safety lecture, a demonstration, so that they know what's expected of them when they do actually touch one of the things that they're going to be using in the class.
So there are protocols that I know that archery, let's just say NASP, and hunter education in Kentucky, they follow the kids into the conservation camp setting, right?
We have switched to the whistle commands that NASP has. We have a certain number of whistle blows you do to tell them to load up and shoot and to stop shooting, which is better than hollering to shoot with your voice all day and losing your voice every day. So the whistle thing actually works out pretty good. When they go out in the woods to shoot at the 3D animal targets, then you take a lot smaller group. You only take a group of like 4 kids at a time with the instructor to go do that part. And there's not a great deal of kids on the range at one time. And there's instructors standing between all these groups of kids to make sure they can take control of the bow if a kid's having a problem. But at gun safety, We took years ago, we went from lying down and shooting to sitting at a shooting table and shooting, and the guns have a short chain where you can't just pick the gun up and aim it wherever you want and accidentally shoot anybody. You can only point the gun at the firing range. So that helps a whole lot with safety there.
And every instructor is a graduate of the Hunter Ed program, correct?
Right. All of our counselors and instructors at camp, everybody gets to camp at least 2 weeks early before any child shows up. And we have to go through the gun safety class, got to go through the instructor training. Some years they go through the archery instructor training also. So they know how to do everything before a child ever shows up. Camps
have been in business since 1945,
late 40s.
The late 40s. And you've been there since the 80s. Have you seen any extra emphasis given over the years to safety?
Any little accident now is pending litigation, it seems like. So we try to cut out any possibility of having an accident. And that's the first thing that we'll tell you is when the kids show up at camp, and you'll ask any counselor if you show up at camp, what's the number one priority of camp? And some people would expect them to say that the kids have fun or that the kids learn to do this. And every person you'll ask will say the same thing. Number one priority at camp is safety. First thing out of their mouth, safety. And then you have fun. Then you learn how to do stuff. But everything you do at camp is all revolving around safety. We're teaching gun safety. We're teaching archery safety. We're teaching boating safety. We're teaching safety just by having you wear a life jacket. You have to wear a life jacket if you're on a fishing dock or in the boat dock, because we want them to get a lifelong habit of wearing a life jacket when they're at the lake or at the river. So it's camp all revolves around safety.
Did the kids just sort of accept, okay, I've got to do it right. I'm not at home in my backyard. Here, I have to do it right.
Kids are so used to being in school and having to follow rules all day. When they show up someplace and you give them a set of rules, they just understand that's part of it. If you want to shoot my gun, you're going to have to sit and listen to me tell you how to do it correctly and safely. If you're going to drive my boat, you're going to have to put that life jacket on. You're not going to be driving my boat. You're not going to be doing the canoeing if you don't have a life jacket. And you'll get a kid, maybe a couple of kids this summer say, well, my granddaddy tells me this. My granddaddy doesn't make me do this. Or my grandma takes me and doesn't. Well, I'll tell them your grandma doesn't work here. That if you want to do it that way when you're with them, that's on them. But when you're in my world and you're at Fish and Wildlife Camp, you got to do it my way because I'm in charge of you and I'm in charge of your safety.
Kids earn patches. And to do that, you got to follow the rules.
Right. You don't get your patch if you don't do everything the way you're supposed to. Now, we give them a chance. Basically, what happens is you go to an activity sometime early in the week with your cabin and learn how to do whatever the activity is. Later in the week, when you go back to the activity, you'll have like an achievement test where they see if you can actually do it correctly or not. And you'll have time to practice on free time if you choose to. Some kids go to camp and they really don't care if they get all the patches or not. They're just going to have fun and run around and do stuff and could care less if they get patches. And there's other kids who go to camp and they want to get every patch in camp. And my daughter went to camp one summer and she got 6 out of the 7 patches. She drove a boat like Ray Charles. She absolutely couldn't drive a boat. It was horrible. Everybody was in danger around her. And so the next summer she concentrated on driving the boat, knowing she already had the other 6 patches, and she passed boating the second year. And if you get all your patches, you get this big patch called the Outdoors Woman for her, or Outdoors Man if you're a boy. And that's the ultimate goal of camp. You want to get all your patches so you can say you're an outdoors person. I would never have gotten all the patches because they would never have let me swim in the lake. That's another safety thing. I swim like shark bait, so I would be in the pool the whole week splashing around, and they'll try to teach me how to swim, but I'm a lost cause.
So you have Red Cross certified lifeguards on staff?
Right. Everybody who's a lifeguard has to go through that training, and we've always had that. We have lifeguards working at boating and fishing. We have lifeguards working in the kitchen.
Other certifications that you like to have present in the camp system?
To be hired at camp, say you want to be a counselor, you're in college, you want to be a summer camp counselor, you have to have a certification in something, CPR, lifeguarding, first aid, bow hunter education, or gun safety. Have your orange card. You can't work there without some type of certification.
Bullying. You mentioned bullying.
Right.
That's one area that maybe we don't think of safety in the same ways as we could or should. Does bullying ever take place at a summer camp?
we have the zero tolerance policy for bullying, and we let them know from day one when they show up. We don't tolerate it at camp. And the good thing about kids is they're not afraid to rat somebody out. If there's some kid picking on some other kid, I'll tell them right off. I said, if you see somebody picking on somebody else or ruining somebody else's good time, I want to know that immediately. I have in the past sent kids home. I'll have kids sit out of activities on the front porch of the office. If you can't get along with your neighbor, you're in the wrong place.
Can you count on one hand over the summer the accidents that really happen? And are they just accident related? You trip walking down a trail. You can't always watch out for some things.
I'm in the office. I'm the assistant camp director, so I'm in the office most of the day. And with our nurses stationed, nursing student that works as our nurse. And most of what we get is a constant run of Band-Aids. Band-Aids on your knees or your elbows. And that's the biggest injury. And the injuries are pretty minor kid-type injury things.
Gary Rogers, thanks for stopping by. We'll talk to a pair of researchers on the subject of recreational injury, Andrew Lincoln and Lisa Hepburn, PhDs from Johns Hopkins University. Stay with us. You're listening to Kentucky Afield Radio. We are back on Kentucky Afield Radio. This is Charlie Baglan. This hour is devoted to recreation safety. I am honored to have two leading research experts in the field of youth sports. They received their doctorates from Johns Hopkins University and are now with MedStar Sports Medicine Research Center. That's in the greater Washington, D.C. area. Doctors Lisa Hepburn and Andy Lincoln, thanks for your time.
Thanks very much. Great to be here.
Both of you have kids, I'm going to guess?
We do. I have 4 children, ages 7 to 15, so they're right in the heart of all this.
We are flirting with disaster, it seems like, in everything we do these days, from getting out of bed in the morning to driving to work, and in sports and recreation and life. Are accidents really out there waiting to happen?
It does seem like that sometimes. We look at everything as having some inherent risk associated with it. That risk will vary depending on the environment or kind of our individual factors and traits and skills or weaknesses. I think our role, as we see it, is really to try and minimize those risks as much as possible.
We all learn to play on a playground. And I was thinking about playgrounds this morning. We do a lot of climbing, and playgrounds lend themselves more to the outdoor type sports, rock climbing. What do we learn from playgrounds that we can apply throughout our life in any sport?
Well, one of the things that we talk about right now frequently is this concept of physical literacy. And just like we learn how to read, we learn how to play, especially when we're young. And we learn how to jump and run and throw and skip and hop and climb. So playgrounds are probably the prime spot where kids learn those basic skills that will help them later on as they become athletes in other sports.
Seems like there has been a turning point. Once we could go outside and play, and we wouldn't have to worry about things. We could ride our bike, or we could roller skate or skateboard. But now, there is all of the safety equipment. We wear helmets for everything we do. We ride a bike, we wear a helmet. We wear wrist braces, knee pads. My wife was a first-grade teacher, and I remember on her playground there was this foam core flooring to prevent injuries. Safety has taken over. Where did this turning point come about?
We've extended our lifespan and our quality of life in this country. A lot of that has to do with injury prevention from automobiles or in the occupational setting. So
I have this list in front of me from the Archery Trade Association, and in it they have a list of sports and participants and how inherently dangerous they may be, the injuries that occur per 1,000 people that are participating. And I said, well, okay, that's great, that's one. And I got out there on Google just this morning and was looking at, I decided to pick the first 10 that showed up, and I looked at the most dangerous sports. And every list was different. It seems like there would be one count. Yeah, is it going to be football is the most dangerous? Or is it going to be horseback riding? One even had horseback riding, bull riding, cheerleading. Another one had football, rugby, and wrestling. Another one had base jumping, horseback, scuba diving. And there's a lot of different lists out there of the most dangerous to the least dangerous sports and activities that we can take part in. Do you know of one that is sort of the gospel?
The first answer is no. There is no gospel. There is no one place to go get all of that information in a very valid, reliable way. And primarily it's because we don't have a central way to collect that information. And that's a question we're asked so frequently when Andy and I talk about the type of work we do, is what is the safest sport for my child? What should they do? What should they not do?
I found one that seemed to me to be a somewhat credible source, Forbes magazine. And they had their list of the most dangerous sports here. Number 1, base jumping. I can't imagine that too many kids are doing that. Heli-skiing. Can't imagine that too many kids are doing that. So this probably applies to grown-ups who still think they're 16. Scuba diving, cave diving, bull riding, surfing, street luging, mountain climbing, bicycle motocross, and whitewater rafting. I looked at that top 10, and 7 of those 10 are what we would call here nature or wildlife-related sports. Does that surprise you that it's not the baseball, football, basketball?
No, it probably depends on what they used as their measure of danger. Was it a fatality? Did somebody die? Was somebody severely injured where they required extended hospitalization? It probably, thinking about those types of sports, while they're not high participation sports, most likely the outcomes that occurred were severe, perhaps, and fairly rare, so that gave them a high rate of injury. I'm not surprised that they're outdoor sports. I think probably many more people are participating in outdoor sports such as hiking or fishing, snowmobiling, where there's probably a less risk of injury but more participation.
As long as we're talking about these outdoor sports, we could take a look at hunting or horseback riding. Archery could be in there, canoeing, kayaking. There are several out there that we like to do that are nature and wildlife related. Does your research ever reflect injuries in that? Are they even a blip on your radar?
There are researchers, and there's an entire medical journal devoted to injuries and illnesses related to outdoor living. The Journal of Wilderness Medicine, for example, publishes papers on those types of injuries actually fairly often.
Extreme sports are becoming more popular, I think, both because of the thrill as well as the risk of injury. I think those are correlated. And with more folks getting involved in the extreme sports, we're going to have more severe injuries just by their nature.
Right.
So I think to answer your question, I think it is difficult to compare some of these sports because it can be apples to oranges. And it depends exactly on to what degree, a canoe trip in a calm lake versus perhaps whitewater canoeing or on an active river. Most of the time with water sports, the greatest risk of injury or death is from drowning, and we do know that with almost all water sports across the board. Recreational boating, canoeing, kayaking, river rafting, it tends to be related to the fact that you're on the water itself.
Just in your experience, what are the most dangerous sports?
Well, and that depends on kind of what age group and what sex. At the youngest age group, that 0 to 4-year-old, it's the playground.
And let's say your middle high school years.
So getting into the high school years where it's more organized sport activity, so that's when they're playing more of the basketball and football and soccer.
Contact sports seem to be more dangerous than non-contact.
Right, and that comes back to the central issue of from another player or from contact to the ground or a ball or a stick, and that exceeds our physiological thresholds to manage that.
There was an article in JAMA, the Journal of American Medical Association, back in September of 2016 called It's Time to Change the Rules. And in it, it basically says that coaches are coaching their kids to give it all they got, to hit as hard as they can, to run as fast as they can. And I'm wondering, is this go for gold mentality just a part of our culture now?
I think there's a lot of exposure to professional sports, and we are entertained by bigger, faster, stronger.
Yeah.
And we like to see folks achieve tremendous levels of athletic competence. So naturally, that transfers to our youth athletes.
Kids have a sense of invincibility. If they put on the helmet and they put on the padding, then nothing can hurt them. What is your advice to parents or even kids themselves about this sense of invincibility?
Boy athletes, male athletes, youth, especially the adolescent, does tend to have less sense of being at risk. That's a hard thing to address.
Now, we're macho by birth.
That's right.
Yeah, that's something we refer to as the testosterone poisoning for the man.
I think we are playing an interesting balancing act with safety in youth sports. We do know that one of the reasons kids will stop playing sports or people won't be active anymore is because they get injured. So by keeping kids from having injuries, they're playing more. They're still on the team. They're in the game. So I'm all for ways to keep kids active in sports because, hey, they're not hurt. However, we have to make sure kids are playing the sport and not afraid of being injured. So it's finding that balance between let's keep them safe, let's keep them in the game, and let's make sure they're playing the game.
Do we overprotect? Do we have to let kids get beat up a little bit so that they learn how better to do it next time?
I think there is some truth in that, and I think that's a pendulum that kind of swings back and forth across going from no protection to overprotection, and then probably coming back to a happy medium. Putting a rule in place for everything makes a game not playable or not enjoyable.
Yeah.
Or even the officials may be reluctant to call something if they're concerned that the punishment doesn't fit the crime, so to speak. So they may not call something.
Well, it sounds like sportsmanship also comes into this, not if you win or lose. It's how you play the game. Is that lost on today's kids?
It has been largely lost until recently. But there have been a few groups that have tried to take youth sports back away from the trend towards professionalization, if you will, and giving the game back to the kids. Because I think when we were growing up, we would go out and we would play on our own. And the days of that are largely gone in large parts of the country. Now it's virtually all organized by adults, and kids rarely go out to play just for the sake of play and having fun. So a lot of the focus these days is on trying to create opportunities for kids to play even if they're not the best for both their physical and mental health.
It seems like if we're talking about doing sports or some recreational activity, we already assume that we are physically fit. What about kids that are handicapped? What about the Special Olympics? You know, they're out there doing this too. That's a testimony. If they can do it, I can do it.
Tremendous movement, I think, for adaptive sports. And I think one of the places we're seeing this is that is adaptive playgrounds. And so creating play spaces and creating active spaces, and people often see it often in water and public pools where there's ramps as well to make pools adaptive and accessible for children and adults with disabilities. The opportunity for more people to compete at higher levels, again, is an example that shows recreational associations that they can offer these opportunities for perhaps youth who have some different disabilities.
But Charlie, I would also add that I think fitness and sport activity is not just for the young, and we're seeing benefits really across the age spectrum. Being physically active in the oldest of our population, so it really does span all ages and conditions.
And the research is showing also opportunity to be exposed to the natural setting. So being not just going for a walk perhaps inside on a treadmill, but actually physically being outside in a natural setting has mental health benefits that they're able to demonstrate and measure both for children and adults.
I like that. You brought that up, the sort of the mental health side of sports, the absence of sports in a kid's life. I remember years ago I saw this Nike commercial that said, if you let me play sports, and it featured little girls saying, I will be more self-confident, I'll have better grades, I'll be 60% more likely to leave an abusive relationship, I'll be more likely to graduate from high school if you let me play sports. Can you expound on that?
I think sports create a great environment for a lot of lessons learned in terms of character development and leadership. And I think those things that you were mentioning relate to that opportunity. We have a number of studies that do show that kids who play sports do have a number of positive outcomes, better grades, better graduation rates, and a lot of health outcomes. The kids who may be playing sports may also just be better natural leaders. A lot of that might come anyway. So it's not necessarily that sports causes those things, but it is associated with a lot of those outcomes.
We know that if children are active and gain these skills where they feel comfortable, able to hit a ball, throw a ball, run, jump, later in life they will continue those activities. And those health outcomes are undeniable.
Dr. Hepburn, Dr. Lincoln, thank you again for your time.
And,
all right.
After the break, we'll talk with the man who is responsible for a youth sport that has swept the nation, but started right here in Kentucky, NASP Archery. At last count, it had more kids participating in it than Little League Baseball. What did he and his team do at the outset to take aim on safety? You'll hear as our show on reducing the risk continues. You're listening to Kentucky Afield Radio. Baglan back on Kentucky Afield Radio. Listen, if you would like to hear this show again or share it on Facebook or email someone the link, it's easily done. Go to our Facebook page and you can like us there and get our weekly links. Also find us on YouTube. Put Kentucky Afield Radio in the search box and up will pop a long list. We're also a weekly podcast on iTunes. More on keeping danger at bay. First up, our fishing report.
I didn't know when I woke up that morning that birds would stop singing or the sun would stop shining.
Alex Audie, 13-year-old survivor of a collision with a drunk boater.
No one told me because they didn't know themselves. Blindsided, my legs were shattered, it broke my neck, I lost my leg, and I almost lost my life.
Lake Harrington, Kentucky.
It's illegal to drink in public, and Kentucky waterways are public.
When we arrived on the location, there were still beer cans floating on the water.
Contrary to popular belief, beer and boating don't go hand in hand.
Her personal watercraft was in shambles, and the bass boat was flipped on its top.
By all accounts, I shouldn't be here. But before that first scream or the care of the first responders, the first thing that saved my life was my life jacket.
Life jackets.
They're like little angels. They lift you up.
Kentucky Boating and Conservation Officers remind you.
Your life jacket's got your back.
We are back on Kentucky Afield Radio into our second half hour. My name is Charlie Baglan, and this program is focused today on playing it safe. If you were in elementary school or middle or high school any time since 2002, your school may have been and may still be active in the NASP Archery program. NASP stands for the National Archery in the Schools program. This year in Kentucky alone, State Coordinator Lisa Fry told me that 685 schools were in the program. That adds up to about 142,000 kids. Across the nation, that number is closer to 2.6 million. So how do you put something as ominous as a bow and arrow in a child's hand and not put danger in there along with it? Well, my next guest has these answers because it was under his supervision and hands-on leadership that NASP began back in 2002. And it all started with a core group of a couple of dozen middle schools in Kentucky. Roy Grimes is the president of NASP, and he joins me now on our show on reducing the risk. So, Mr. Grimes, you knew that archery had to be safe, or schools would never accept it. How'd this all come about?
Well, the first thing we did is we researched safety in archery, and that's when we found out the National Safety Council rated it safer than everything except table tennis. So we thought that it was safe. I mean, those of us that are in archery, we've heard of archery accidents before because they're alarming. They're so rare, they're alarming. So we wanted to make sure that was indeed rare. So we checked those records, and sure enough, we found out that it's practically unheard of for there to be an archery accident. Then we needed to make sure that our program, at the very least, maintain that near-perfect safety record of archery and improve upon it. Of course, some of the accidents of record that happen in archery, they can be avoided. For example, sometimes when somebody falls on an arrow because they're walking on it in the woods, down a creek bank, a guy died in St. Louis, that very thing, that can certainly be avoided. We won't have those kinds of arrowheads, and people won't be walking on uneven terrain. They'll be walking on a gymnasium floor, and they won't be walking with an arrow nock. So we can eliminate a lot of the reasons that even a rare archery accident occurs by our own safety protocols. We had to identify what are the potential areas where people could be hurt. One of them would obviously be in the use of the bow itself. Dry firing a bow could hurt somebody, so we had to make sure our safety protocols prevented that. Walking with a nocked arrow, we needed to make sure that couldn't happen in our program. Making sure that everyone was safe when shooting began and while it continued. So that meant we adopted then safety protocols where shooting line, and everybody's on the shooting line and nobody starts shooting until the all clear sign is given. So some range rules. And then we threw in one of our own. The most common place that an archery accident occurs, and it's generally not a serious accident, but it's when somebody's pulling an arrow from the target and there's someone standing behind it too closely. Well, we knew that could happen in a classroom with all these kids. So we created the target line 6 foot away from the target. So if you're waiting to pull arrows from a target, you stand behind that line, safely away from the knock of the arrow being pulled by your lane mate.
That is the only accident I have ever heard of. The accident didn't happen with the point of an arrow, but with the knock of an arrow.
Right.
And when it was pulled out, somebody was behind that arrow, and it hit them maybe in the nose or hit them in the knee.
And we always say during the training that when they're down there pulling arrows, when we're explaining that one of you will wait behind this line, if you're two on a target while the other pulls, we say, my quote is, this is where accident will happen in your program, unless the waiting archer is safely behind this line, far enough away from the targets to not be struck.
I know if you go to a tennis match, it's not uncommon to see a tennis player pick up their racket and play air guitar. You've seen that. We all have, or maybe even on a baseball bat. But in archery, that doesn't happen. If you have any piece of equipment in your hand, it is to shoot or in the process of shooting.
They can't even have the equipment in their hands until they're given a signal to do so. And then once that equipment is in their hand, they're on the clock. They don't have time to play guitar. They've got 2 minutes to shoot 5 arrows and then get that bow out of their hands and go back to the weight line. Little things like when a kid is finished shooting on our shooting line, they immediately must leave that shooting line, re-rack the bow, and go behind the waiting line. In adult, I'll call it adult archery, what is done is if you're standing next to someone shooting, you don't move off that shooting line until the person next to you has finished their shot. And it's a courtesy not to distract them while they're shooting. We don't allow that. That's horseplay waiting to happen.
The Archery Trade Association put out a brochure, and a lot of people have seen this, but it places archery in general as the 4th safest in their list. The sports out there that are going to have even fewer accidents would be bowling, badminton, and table tennis. They have that .45. If you have .45 of a person out of 1,000, so it would take 2,000 people to get close to one archery accident. Are those the numbers you see? Now, that's for all of archery. Is NASP Archery even safer than the brochure?
Yeah, far safer, because I can tell you that .45 would be .00 out of 13,000 from our experience at a national tournament. A little girl in Somerset pulled an arrow from a target and hurt her shoulder, just a strain accident. So, that .5, frankly, that alarms me. You can count them on one hand since we've been in existence, and that's 18 million kids, because we are extremely deliberate and highly controlled in our range protocols. And one of the reasons we are is because we realize we're dealing with young people who have little or no experience, who may be easily distracted. So we know that we have to be very strict. But it's in a friendly way. For example, if I'll have a policeman say, now you got to stand behind that target line or this knock can poke your eye out. Well, I stop them when they say that. First, I'll say if they're standing behind the target line, all you have to do is say, so it should be safe from the knock of the arrow and uninjured by it. You don't have to be graphic and gruesome about poking an eye out.
You tell them what to do in a positive way versus what not to do.
And we don't try to make our point by saying something that is unrealistic in terms of it's going to happen.
What about just inherent accidents? If the bow breaks or the string would break, does this occur?
It can, but I have never seen it or heard of it in NASP. Now, I've shot archery for 46 years. I've never even had a string break. But I maintain them. I wax them. I replace them. But in NASP, of course, the riser, the bow's handle is a solid block of aluminum. It's not going to break. The limbs are very, very durable. I've been tested and tested and tested. I've never heard of one breaking. I've never witnessed a string or even heard of a string or a cable breaking. It's all heavy-duty stuff.
Let me ask you this about NASP. It is international. Are the same safety precautions in place worldwide, and do cultural differences influence safety?
Well, the first part is really easy. Yes, our training is exactly the same no matter where you live. We like to say to a teacher, when an arrow is dropped, what you're going to say about that arrow will be repeated in Australia 13 hours from now. Exactly the same. Teachers, by the way, get a big kick out of that to know that they trust. This must be very good if everybody in the world is using the same language. They are all trained the same. They're all required to use the same safety protocols. So that's the first part. And then the second question was what? Oh, cultural differences.
Yeah.
Well, the training would supersede those. If somebody comes in with some kind of different method or technique, we insist they put it aside. They've got to adopt these techniques and protocols and pass those on to their children. I mean, we see it, for example, on a micro scale. You'll see a veteran archer dad come into a training and he shoots split finger, one finger above the arrow and two fingers below. Well, that causes the arrow to fall off the arrow rest. For an inexperienced archer, we don't allow that to be done. When you're teaching the kids in the beginning, we tell that dad, you've got to learn to shoot three fingers under because that's what you've got to teach the kids so that they'll be able to manage the arrow, keep it on the arrow rest.
Looking down the road, you say out of 18 million kids that have ever taken part in this, you can count the injuries on one hand.
And they are minor. They're not even visit to school nurse injuries. They're sore hands or a bruise from a knock hitting them in the leg.
Are there still tweaks you're always making, your eyes always to safety?
Well, we're always aware, and we're always on the lookout for things that we hadn't seen or anticipated yet. But I can tell you that it is highly unlikely. We very rarely have to change anything because our safety protocols have been proven to work. We are always alert to make sure that safety is as strong as it can be.
You told me it's been some years ago now, but when NASP got its start, you were hoping that it would be adopted by the Kentucky High School Athletic Association, and it wasn't right off. And in fact, there may have been a gap of 8 or 10 years in there before it actually was. But you said that worked out to your benefit because NASP brought with it this tremendous safety record. Then that really impressed the association. Elaborate on that.
The safety record was part of it. The bigger part of why I was glad that we didn't get what we asked for then is because we wouldn't have been so confident in our competition protocol, in how far they shoot and how many arrows they shoot and how long they get to shoot. If it had been approved right off the bat, there would have been other ways to compete in archery that might have been adopted by KHSAA. We wouldn't have had so much experience behind us to say this is the way to do it. When it came along when it did, we could then say, okay, we've had millions shoot this way. Our program is safe, and our program is fun, and it's competitive. And it's not too easy, not too difficult. So when it finally was adopted, there was no youth archery program in existence that could say it had more experience than we did.
NASP Archery, pardon the pun, is a bullseye with kids worldwide, and Kentucky is so proud that it got its start right here. NASPschools.org will let you learn more. I mentioned at the outset of the show this archery safety brochure from the Archery Trade Association. I asked a representative there if they would like to comment, and they simply said no. They didn't want to take any credit for archery being safe, but they do stand by the numbers, and they're just happy that archers across the board respect the sport and take the steps to ensure a safe experience. Music is playing, still to come, what's overlooked in water fun, and hunting seasons come fall. Stay with us. You're listening to Kentucky Afield Radio. Charlie Baglan, we're back on Kentucky Afield Radio in our final few minutes. We have titled this program, Reducing the Risk. We're focusing largely on children's recreational activities, but the lessons can apply to all of us. I was 14 once. I knew it all. You couldn't tell me much. Hard-headedness does little for calculated risks. You can always blame something else when it comes back to bite you. But parents will ask, is this safe? The more you know about any sport, the more safely you can excel in it. In our last segment, we'll talk about what's commonly overlooked in boating and water recreation. But first up, Jamie Cook. He's with the Kentucky Hunter Ed program. Mr. Cook, I'm glad you're here.
Thanks, Charlie. Happy to be here.
Hunter education. You don't want anything less than safety when you're in the hunting arena. That's going to be uppermost on someone's mind, don't you think, especially if you're a parent?
Well, I think as a parent myself, one of my largest concerns is, the safety aspect around a firearm. I
don't want my kid playing with a gun. Tell me why it isn't playing. There's some instruction involved here.
There's a lot of instruction involved in our hunter education courses. It really runs the whole gamut from beginning to end, the process of becoming a hunter. And one of the major stressing points is safety in the field. It goes in depth, and it gives, more importantly, an opportunity for those students to actually practice and demonstrate in front of a certified instructor their ability to handle a firearm safely while in the field. We also talk for at least one whole hour on archery and tree stand safety, talking about the differences between the two. We mentioned crossbows in most of our classes.
One of your key safety talks is about what you've called muzzle control.
The business end, as we like to call it, is called the muzzle. We stress muzzle control to a level of perfection, because if there's an incident in the field, it's because someone's not handled their muzzle properly.
Let's talk a minute. You mentioned tree stand. So you're in a tree and you're sitting in a stand there. That needs to be secure.
Absolutely. Have to make sure that your equipment is in good shape. There have been records of accidents, people falling from tree stands because the straps on their harness or the straps that attach the tree stand to the tree have dry rotted, and there's one case in Alabama that resulted in a fatality.
Hunter Orange.
The purpose of Orange is to let other hunters know where you're located.
We've all been 14 years old. They're coming into adulthood, and they just feel like I'm confident to do this with the skills I already have. Is there something out there, maybe you see it on range day, that there's just a mistake? You're always having to go through and say, wait a minute, we've taught you a different way. What are those?
But the one thing that we usually always call youngins out on is having that finger outside the trigger guard. They're much more likely to make some of these mistakes that, like you mentioned, Charlie, are, well, I'm immune to this. I've done this before. Versus the kids that come in for the first time and maybe are petrified of even holding a firearm. They're going to be much more likely to not put their finger inside the trigger guard and make some of these novice oversights.
So you're a parent. Would you rather your kids grow up to be hunters, football players, or maybe rock climbers? What do you think of the three is going to be the safest overall?
For a safety aspect,
yeah,
I would say hunting hands down, and that's not just because I teach this for a living. Knowing that you've got to have a required safety course mandated by the state, knowing that we've got 600 or 700 quality instructors out there across the Commonwealth that give their own time and money at times to help make this program a success is enough knowledge for me to stress to anybody that hunting by far is the safest sport in Kentucky.
Jamie, thanks a million.
Thanks a lot, Charlie.
Jamie Cook with Kentucky Hunter Education. The final topic is one that we all love to do, water recreation. From swimming, rafting, boating, water skiing, wave runners, kayaking, that wet world of recreation. Zac Campbell is Kentucky's boater education coordinator. And where does water recreation factor into all of this?
I would say that boating can be a 1 on that scale or a 10 on that scale based on the safety precautions you practice while boating. Boating without a life jacket kind of be thought of as playing football without a helmet. If you're educated and practice safe boating and you pass those on to your kids and you are an example to your children on how to boat safely, it can be the most enjoyable, safe activity out of all of them.
What's the one thing out there you fear that a kid is really not going to pick up on that's really is going to help them the most?
With that question, where boating kind of doesn't fit with some of the other sports is baseball, football, soccer, the kids out there participating in the activity by themselves. With boating, the way it can be so much more safe than any of those other sports is because the parents are right there next to the child with them. I can't go play on my son's soccer team with a bunch of 10-year-olds. It doesn't work that way. Young kids aren't allowed to operate the boat. If they're 12 to 17 and they have a boater education card, they can operate the boat. So there's different practices. If you're asking me while a kid's operating the boat, that's different than the kid just on the boat while the parents are operating it. Life jackets are overlooked all the time. Then having a proper lookout, someone to help see things, because the operator is responsible for everyone on board. Might as well have someone up there helping them, like an assistant coach. You need an extra set of eyes at all times.
You're going to see a little bit of both of this. You're going to have kids in the boat. You're going to have kids being pulled on skis. You will have kids operating personal watercraft. Is there one thing that worries you overall, or if they're doing one thing that you feel like, regardless of what they're doing, if they're wakeboarding or what, they're going to be safe because they're doing these 1 or 2 or 3 things?
The broadest safety measure you can take that's going to keep you the safest is wearing a life jacket. Whether you're operating, whether you're a kid on the boat, it's a life jacket.
I was a kid once. I know you were. You grew up playing football. Rules don't apply to me. What's your advice to parents like that or to kids like that who just think they already know how?
Take a boating education class, because I promise you, you don't know everything. You'll take the class and you'll learn a lot. Some stuff you'll realize that you've been doing wrong all this time. And it's for kids, it gives them a good foundation on how to become a safe boater. And sports, you got a referee out there always on the field telling you when you did something wrong. We've got referees out there also, but sometimes we'll only have 1 or 3 per lake, and they're not wearing striped uniforms. They're wearing green conservation officer uniforms. There's not always one of us out there to enforce the rules like there would be on a field of play.
Zach, thanks a million. If you're going to throw caution to the wind, at least do it safely. Don't hurt your arm. It's been a good show. Nobody got hurt, and so we will live to do it next week. We're out of time. This is Charlie Baglan inviting you to join us in a week, and we'll go inside, outdoors again, here on Kentucky Afield Radio.